Hello girls, I'm back with another poem for the second BA literature students for the paper British Poetry. Now let me share the slide with you. Okay. So the title of the poem is A Prayer for My Daughter. As the title says, it's sung by one of the parents. The father's love for the child could be understood by reading this poem, and the poet is W.B. Yeats, a very well-known Irish poet. William Butler Yeats is his full name. We call him by the name W.B. Yeats. So he was born in Dublin. I told you he's an Irish poet. So he was born in Dublin, 13 June 1865. He studied at the School of Arts, Dublin. So he pursued arts in the beginning. He was interested in religion and he started to believe in supernatural element forces which could be seen in his poems, the later poems that he has written. At the age of 12, he started writing literature. He pursued literature by pursuing his study of art, and he started with editing the poems of William Blake. William Blake is again another writer who talks about supernatural images and all. So W.B. Yeats was greatly influenced by the poet William Blake, who was a nationalist. He was very much interested in the country and he contributed his share in the freedom struggle too, in the Irish Revolution too. He was a nationalist and he was active in establishing Irish National Theatre. Besides writing poems, he was actively involved in establishing the National Theatre, which was called Abbey Theatre. And his personal life also colors his poems. Actually, he was influenced by two women in his political career. The first woman was a very intellectual, a beautiful lady called Maud Gonne, who rejected his love. So his unrequited love for unfulfilled love for Maud Gonne has influenced him to write poetry in the earlier days. Later on, he married George Heides Lees. He married her in 1917, who influenced her to talk about images that are highly spiritual, and his poems later on after marrying Lee, his poems they tend to grow very symbolic. So symbols, the world of symbols was open to him with his companionship with his wife Heidi, and he won Nobel Prize for the literature in 1923, and he died on 28 January 1939. This is a simple biography of him. So I would like to remember you. This is a photograph. You can have a look at him. He's an intellectual person, and most of his lines can be taken as intelligent quotes. One example is given. He calls education as not something to fill the pail, but the lighting of the fire. Very brilliantly said, right? So most of his lines could be taken and quoted. Even about his mistress, must be for the Maud Gonne, he has said that, "Thou art my love, gentle torment." So he calls love to be something that torments. Like that, endlessly, you can take the lines of Yeats and go on quoting. Such a brilliant poet that he is, and his choice of diction is very, very beautiful. That conveys the exact feeling. This particular poem is a very personal poem, and we'll go to the understanding of the poem. More about the poem. It was written in 1990 and published 2 years later in 1921. This poem was written while he was staying in the tower called Thur Valley Lee Tower. When he was staying with his wife and child, his daughter, he wrote this poem. This poem was written 2 days after the birth of his daughter named Annie. It was on 26th February that she was born, and he must have written the poem after 2 days, 28th February 1919, this particular poem was written, and it is marked for his personal tone. I told you this is about his anxiety and fear for his daughter. So this is highly personal in tone. And this poem you could find the love that was rejected, the love that he had for the beautiful woman Maud Gonne was rejected in the year 1916. So very, very, all these happened in a very near, somewhat in a close time span. So within a year or two, all these happens, and you could find all that finding expression in the particular poem. So another thing that you have to remember is the images also tells you, the images that come in the poem also tells you that this poem has the background of violence of war, because this poem was written soon after the First World War. You know, it was fought between 1914 to 1918, and the poem was written 1919. So the consequences of the First World War was also making its own impact on the poem. The anxiety and the rootlessness that the people feel, the kind of economic depression, recession that they've been undergoing, and the future, or how it is going to be. All anxieties could be seen in the poem. So the impact of the World War and Anglo-Irish War. Ireland was trying to get itself free from the shackles of the colonization. So that could also be read in between the lines, and it also highlights the post-war agitation. The problems that followed, ensued after the World War could also be seen, and it could be seen as a record of his anxiety over the trouble his child has to face in this post-war Ireland. So this is the setting of the poem, or the background, which will help you to understand the poem better. Hope you understood. This was written in a post-World War period, and his child is only 2 days old, and he was staying in a tower near the forest. So the setting, I once again remind you, this poem was written set in a stormy night, a night where he could feel the strong winds banging against the doors, and he's staying indoor with his child, who is sleeping in the cradle. Covered in the cradle, the child, the 2-year-old daughter, is sleeping, and there is a woods forest nearby, and a small river also flowing by. This is the setting. So it's a stormy night, and the tower is very close to that of a forest, and this wind could be, the water flowing could be heard because it is so near to the stream, and the daughter, 2-year-old daughter, is sleeping in her cradle. This is the setting. Now we go to the poem. See, it has 10 stanzas. And the first stanza starts like this. Once more, the storm is howling, and half hid under this cradle hood and coverlet, my child sleeps on. There is no obstacle but Gregory's Wood and one bare hill whereby the haystack and the roof leveling wind, bred on the Atlantic, can be stayed. And for an hour I have walked and prayed because of the great doom that is in my mind. So all the anxieties and the troubled time could be read in these lines. Once more the storm is howling. So once again you could hear the storm howling. The wind, when blowing in a very rapid speed, you can hear its sound. Buzzing sound could be, howling sound could be heard, and half hid. Being a very chill night, the daughter is half hid under the cradle, and peacefully it is sleeping. It doesn't know what is happening outside, so it is fast asleep, and there is no obstacle but Gregory's Wood and one bare hill whereby the haystack and roof level wind bred on the Atlantic can be stayed. So he's describing the scenario. The storm that has gathered momentum from the Atlantic Ocean is coming across or blowing in the direction of the tower, and nothing stops it but the Gregory's Wood. Gregory's Wood, the forest. The Gregory's Wood with this bare hill. Bare hill doesn't have so much plants on it. So this is the only obstacle that bars the wind from dashing against the tower. Hope you understood, ma? He's describing the scenario, the scene around him, and he says that the wind is blowing very fast from the Atlantic Ocean, and there is nothing to stop the wind but this wood, the forest, and the hill that is there, whereby the haystack and roof leveling wind. The wind is said to be a great leveler. Has to be noted. The wind that blows away everything that comes on the way. It doesn't have any discrimination as to a rich person, a poor person, a powerful person, like that. It has no discrimination. So it is said to be a roof leveling wind. It levels everything. The wind is blowing at a very rapid rate, and only the forest as well as the hill could stop it. Otherwise, it blows freely. For 1 hour, I have walked and prayed. When I looked at the storm outside, I feel very, very restless. And when you are restless, you cannot sit in a place as I am doing right now. You have the habit of walking up and down. So the poet is also walking up and down, restless, thinking about the future. And he was praying for the child whom he wishes to have a very peaceful life. So the storm again can be not literally the storm that takes its form from the ocean, but the storm could also be the troubled times, the war, all those political unrest that is happening right then at Ireland. So the storm can be the literal storm that is blowing, and it can also refer to the unrest, the political, social unrest that the poet is experiencing at that time, which may have its impact in the child. So this is the first stanza about. So beginning where he is describing the child is sleeping and the storm is blowing outside. Now we go to the stanza 2. And he continues, I have walked and prayed for this young child an hour. He repeats the same idea. I've been praying for my child for an hour and heard the sea wind scream upon the tar and under the arches of the bridge and scream in the elms above the flooded stream, imagining in excited reverie that the future years had come, danced to the frenzied drum out of the murderous innocence of the sea. Here, he once again describes the conditions of Ireland and the place that he is residing in. He hears a shrill sound of the sea wind coming from the Atlantic, and the poet has been praying for the child. It fills him with fear. Elm is a tree that is said to be a tree of mourning, right? Elm has something bad to offer to. So in the elms above the flooded stream, imagining in excited reverie that the future years had come. So the war is over and the future is going to be very troublesome, is what the wind is trying to tell him. Dance to the frenzied drum. You know, he's also talking about the victory that the English could reap. And once it is done, they have the habit of celebrating it with beating and dancing. That wild sound could be seen, and it is not at all a welcoming sound. So he is afraid what is going to happen to Ireland after the victory of England out of the murderous innocence of the sea. Murderous innocent, oxymoron. He's talking about the sea which looks so innocent, but what grows inside is so villainous, can be murderous. So at present, the war is over and there may be peace prevailing, but this is like the murderous innocence of the sea. Once again, this stanza highlights the troubled time that he is living in, and he is also very anxious about the future that the child is going to have in this troubled time. Now we move to stanza 3. May she be granted beauty and yet not beauty to make a stranger's eye distraught, or hers before a looking glass for such. Being made beautiful overmuch, consider beauty a sufficient end, lose natural kindness and maybe the heart revealing intimacy that chooses right and never find a friend. So the tone changes slightly here. He forgets about the surroundings and he is concentrating on his daughter, and he's making a first wish for the daughter. Every parent, you may know, the day you are born as a child, the parents starts to have nourish a memory or to have a dream about how you are going to come up, to be brought up, and they will be thinking about even your marriage at the day they are born. So here you find the same line of thought being followed by W.B. Yeats, where he is making the first wish. When the child grows up, the child should be like this. That was the first wish that he expresses in stanza 3 and 4. Two stanzas expresses the first wishes of the first wish of the poet. He says, may she be granted beauty, if not beauty to make a stranger's eye distraught. My daughter should be beautiful. Every parent wants that way. And to every parent, their own child is the most beautiful one in the world. So he says that my daughter should be beautiful, but she should not be that attractive as to catch the stranger's eye. She should not distract or disturb the mind of a stranger. One who looks at her should not be carried away by the beauty. She should be ordinarily beautiful. She should be attractive but not very beautiful. So once again, the reference is to Maud Gonne, whom he fell in love the minute he looked at her. So the daughter should not be as beautiful as that of Maud Gonne. Hers before looking glass was such, being made beautiful overmuch, consider beauty a sufficient end. So what is the drawback of being extremely beautiful? He goes on explaining. He says, if a girl is born so beautiful, very beautiful, she will not have time for anything else but to stand before the mirror and enjoy her beauty, and she will think that beauty is an ultimate need for a human being. She thinks that it's a sufficient end. Beauty is the only thing that matters, will enter the mind of a beautiful girl. I don't want that to happen to my child. So let her not be that very beautiful. And if she is beautiful, what happens? The next drawback is that she will lose her natural kindness and maybe the heart revealing intimacy that chooses right and never find a friend. So what happens when she becomes extremely beautiful? She will not have that kindness. She will be very rude to others. Once again, reference to Maud Gonne, who was very rudely rejected the love of WBA. So he feels that if a woman is extremely beautiful, what happens? She will lose her kindness and she will be rude to people that he doesn't want his child to do. And if you are very beautiful, what happens? You will not find true love. People will follow you only for your beauty, so you may not make good friends. So this is what he thinks are the reasons why the child should not be extremely beautiful. So I repeat, this particular stanza, the poet is trying to make his first wish for his daughter, and his wish is that yeah, she should be beautiful, but not as beautiful as that of Morgan, who attracts the attention and love of anyone who sees her. And he says that beauty should not be excess. If so, she would be spending most of the time before the mirror, and she would lose the kindness, and she will not be able to choose the right friend. She will be carried away by the praise of her beauty, which would come from the wrong side. The friends will not be faithful to her, so she will fail to make an apt friend, a good friend, if the girl is extremely beautiful. So he doesn't want that to happen. Now it's a continuation. He cites examples from mythology, and he tells how beauty can be a curse. Helen, of course, every one of you know who Helen is. Everyone knows, right? Helen, being chosen, found life flat and dull, and later had much trouble from a fool. While the green queen that rose out of the spray, being fatherless, could have her way, yet chose a bandy-legged smith for man. Certain that fine women eat a crazy salad with their meat, whereby the horn of plenty is undone. So a lot of references to classical mythology, Greek mythology has been found in this particular stanza. Here he says, Helen being chosen found life flat. You know, she's the most beautiful of all the mythical characters. She's the one who is the cause of the destruction of Troy. So Helen being chosen found life flat and dull. Her father was not getting her married to people who come asking for her hand, thinking that that was not a right match for her. But finally, she was betrothed to a very old king, Menelaus of Sparta. And she found her life to be very dull and very flat. And later on, she took trouble from a fool. Fool here refers to Paris of Troy. So he came there as a friend of Menelaus, and he fell in love with Helen, and he eloped with Helen. That resulted in a huge war that lasted for several years. And it's called Trojan War, and it destroyed the city of Troy. So it was destroyed. Troy, the spelling mistake is the destruction of, not Troy, destruction of Troy. It resulted in the destruction of Troy. Sorry for the spelling mistake there. And it resulted in the destruction of Troy. So what he is trying to say is Helen was extremely beautiful and she did not find a suitable match. She was married to an old man, which resulted in the further mishappenings by eloping with a man called a fool by name Paris, which brought about the destruction of the great city Troy. The second reference is to a mythical character who sprang out of the spring. Spray means the fountain. So the reference is to Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love. She married a blacksmith. A bowhead is he's referred to as a blacksmith, but he's a god of fire. So he is a very dark, ugly looking man, and she chose him as a husband. She couldn't marry a man of her worth. And she's been called fatherless because she was born out of the fountain. Being fatherless could have her way. So she was not guided rightly by a father figure because she had no father. She went on her own way. Finally, she had to compromise on her husband. She had to marry the bow-legged, the very cross-legged or the bandy-legged blacksmith. It is certain that fine women, so he comes to a conclusion. He takes Helen and Aphrodite as examples and comes to a conclusion. Beautiful women always take crazy salad. Meat is a very delicious dish. And the crazy salad, the very, what do you say, inappetizing or a very tasteless salad, crazy mad salad, they take along with the meat. So they are very beautiful and they choose the reference. I mean, the meaning is that they are very beautiful, but they are not able to make a very beautiful pair. Just like the meat doesn't go with the crazy salad, they also go with the very unsuitable husband, whereby the horn of plenty is under. Another image here is a horn of plenty. It refers to a mythical god called Amalthea. Amalthea is a god that is rewarded by the Greek god Zeus, and when and it finds a place in the among the stars. And what happens is if somebody prays in the name of one of the horns of the god Amalthea, their wish would be granted. So he says, even if you are granted the wish of Amalthea, the horn of plenty, your wish will not be fulfilled if you go very beautiful, because beautiful women doesn't know how to make a right choice. They do not know how to make a wish, right wish. So even the horn of plenty would be undone, will be useless if you are born beautiful. So I told you the third and fourth stanza talks about the first wish of the poet, where he wants the daughter to be ordinary and pleasant looking but not very beautiful, because he cites examples of Helen and Aphrodite, who had made very wrong choices because of being born extremely beautiful, because these women will not have any heart and reason out what is good for them. So these are the examples that he gives to prove why he wishes that way. Now we move to the stanza 5. He goes to the second wish. First wish was ordinary looking, not very beautiful. Second wish was that in courtesy, I would have her chiefly learned. Hearts are not had as gift, but hearts are earned by those that are not entirely beautiful. Yet many that have played the fool, for beauty's very self has charm made wise, and many poor a man that is robed, loved, and thought himself beloved, from a glad kindness cannot take us eyes. So he says, in courtesy, I would have her chiefly learned. I want my daughter to be very courteous, because hearts can be won with a very kind behavior, courteous behavior. Hearts are not had as gift, but hearts are earned. You cannot just have the love of another person for your looks. It should be won by your good behavior. Good manners only wins you the heart of good people, by those that are not entirely beautiful. This could be done only with people who are not beautiful. So it's an extension, the follow-up of the first two stanzas, where he prefers courtesy more than beauty, and hearts could be won only with that, could be won only with that of courtesy and not with, beauty. Yet many that have played the fool for beauty's very self has charm made wise, and many a poor man that is robed, loved, and thought himself beloved, from a glad kindness cannot take his eye. So the reference is to his own self. He says that for many that have played the fool, I have been a fool all through my life, because I got carried away by the beauty of the woman called Morgana, and made up many poor man that is wrote. I went for the feeling of this love. I was filled with love the minute I looked at the beautiful face of Morgan, and I thought that she loved me too. My heart roared with love, and I loved, and I thought himself beloved. He also felt that Morgan was in love with him. He thought himself to be loved, from a glad kindness cannot take his eyes. With that feeling, he couldn't take his eyes away from that of the face of Morgan. The next stanza continues with the same thought. Hope you understood. In this stanza, he says that his daughter should be courteous more than beautiful, because beauty is always distracting, just like he was distracted by the beauty of Morgan. Stanza 6. May she become a flourishing hidden tree, that all her thoughts may be like the linnet bee, and have no business but dispensing around a magnificent merriment begin a chase, not but in a merriment a quarrel. Oh, may she live like some green laurel, rooted in one dear perpetual place. Continuation. May she become a flourishing hidden tree. Hidden tree, the child is a little one. It has not started to come up and get the notice of others. May she become a flourishing hidden tree. A tree that flourishes, but it did not distract the attention. That may be the meaning of hidden. It is a very flourishing one, a fulfilling one, a full bloomed one, but it should not distract the eyes. That's why it's a hidden tree. That all her thoughts may be like the linnet. Linnet is a small little bird that is known for its musical voice. So that girl should be like that of a linnet, sweet tongued or sweet voiced linnet, who have no business but dispensing around their magnanimities of sound. The linnets have only one duty to perform. What is that? They have no business but dispensing around, scattering around the magnanimities of sound, the sweet sound. They have to fill the entire place. They are moving along with the sweetness of the sound, not but in merriment begin a chase, nor but in merriment a quarrel. All their duty, business is to fill the earth with merriment, happiness. The linnet has only one duty to do, to make everyone happy. Whoever listens to the voice of linnet would be happy. So my daughter should be the one who imparts happiness to others. Oh, may she live like some green laurel. Then he talks about the tree laurel. She should be like a linnet. She should be like a laurel tree. Laurel is a very very strong tree that has very deep roots. No storm can uproot it. So it's a strong rooted tree that lives for a long years. So he wants his daughter to be long lived and strong rooted like that of the laurel tree, rooted in one dear perpetual place. So he wants the daughter to have strong root in his culture and tradition. Just like the laurel tree stands in one particular place, forming deep roots around itself, his daughter should also have very strong roots that is rooted in his culture and tradition. He wants the child to be very traditional, like that of the traditional tree of Ireland laurel. So in the sixth stanza, he's talking about how character important. Character is very important. The girl should be courteous. She should spread happiness, and she should be deep rooted like that of the laurel tree. Now we move to the seventh stanza. He makes another wish. My mind, because the mind that I have loved, the sort of beauty that I have approved, prosper but little has dried up of late. It knows that to be choked with hate may well be of evil chances itself. If there is no hatred in a mind, the salt and battery of the wind can never cheer the linnet from the leaf. So he says that, again, personal experience, he talks about what is the consequence of loving a loving a insensitive woman like Morgan. My mind, because the mind that I have loved. My heart, because of the heart. Who is the heart? Whose heart is he talking to? About the heart of this love. Morgan. The sort of beauty that I have approved. The beauty that had attracted my attention, prosper but little. It did not prosper at all. It did not flourish at all. And it is dried up of late. Lately, it had gone out of any emotion because of the love that I had for the wrong woman who was just beautiful and did not have any other quality. My heart has dried up, yet knows that to be choked with hate. And now it is filled with hatred. May well be of all evil chances chief. I know this hatred is the chiefest among all the vices, baddest quality that a man can ever have. It affects the person who holds it. If you are hating somebody, it has nothing to affect the person whom you hate, but it affects you more than the person. So it's the worst of all human vices, bad qualities, and I know that very well. If there is no hatred in the mind, assault and battery of the wind. Assault and battery of the wind talks about the struggles. If you have no hatred in your heart, nothing can trouble you, can never cheer the linnet from the leaf. Once again, the reference is to the small bird linnet. If his child, he is looking at his child as a small bird, he wants the child to be deprived of this human vice called hatred. He knows the consequences of nourishing that feeling called hatred. He filled his heart with hatred for the woman whom he loved, the wrong choice he had made that had deprived him of all other good human emotions. So he knows that this is a very bad quality and he wants his daughter to be devoid of that so that she could be happy and spreading happiness like the bird linnet. And from hatred, he specifies intellectual hatred. So this stanza is a continuation of the seventh stanza where he is talking about intellectual hatred. And intellectual hatred is the worst. So let us think opinions are accursed. Have I not seen the loveliest woman born out of the mouth of plenty's horn? Because of her opinionated mind, batter that horn and every good by quiet natures understood, an old bellows full of angry wind. So once again, the reference is to that of Morgan. So you can understand how much that woman had affected the voice. He says an intellectual hatred is a worst. It is believed that the history or the critics say that Morgan is a very, very intelligent woman. She's not a mere beauty, but she's also having a very, very intelligent mind. That's a rare combination, people say. Beauty and intelligence never goes together. Is the guess of the man. But here you find she's a very intelligent woman. So let her think opinions are a curse. But he says even too much intelligence is a curse. This woman thought herself to be she was intelligent and she is carried away by her intelligence that she made a wrong opinion. Have I not seen the loveliest woman born out of the mouth of plenty's son? She's a very blessed woman. Who is a blessed woman? Morgan. She has born out of plenty's son. She's been born with the boon of that goat, which I have mentioned in the previous stanzas. Hope you remember. The Amalthea goat was gifted by or rewarded by the god, Greek god Zeus. So here you find that though she was born with a boon, she did not use that boon correctly because of her opinionated mind, because of her, what do you say, biased mind. She was discriminating him and she took another person in the place of, and it is said to be a very wrong choice. She divorced soon after her marriage. So he says that the woman was intelligent, she was beautiful, she was born with the boon of God, but still because of her opinionated, because of her favoritism for another man, her life was turned into a futile one. by quiet natures understood for an old bellows full of angry wind. So later on only she understood actually she had invited only angry wind to sweep away her life. Out of the mouth of Tendy's horn she was born because of her opinionated mind, barter that horn and every good by quiet natures understood for an old bellows full of angry wind. And references to the choice that she had made as for her husband. So though she was intelligent and beautiful, she made a very wrong choice, just like that of Helen and Aphrodite. Now stanza 9, considering all these factors, all hatred driven hence, the soul recovers radical innocence and learns at last that it is self-delighting, self-appeasing, self-affrighting, and that its own sweet will is heaven's will. She can, though every face should scowl and every wintry quarter howl or every billows burst, but be happy still. So he says, so I have given you enough reasons why I want my child to be not very beautiful, why I want my child to be courteous and kind. So, and why my daughter should not breed hatred in her mind. Considering all this, all hatred driven him. So she has to redeem herself with all this hatred. The soul recovers radical innocence. Your soul blooms. It radiates. It shines. When you devoid yourself from this hatred, your soul starts to shine and learns at last that it is self-delighting. When your heart is free from hatred, what happens? You become self-delighting. You enjoy your own self, self-appeasing, self-satisfying, self-affrighting. You won't be afraid of anything. And that is the sweetest will is heaven's will. That its own sweet will. If you will something, it would be heaven's will. In other words, if you keep your heart free from hatred, you'll be happy, you'll be peaceful, you will be fearless, and whatever you will, whatever you want, whatever you wish would be granted by heaven or God. She can, though every face should scowl and every wintry quarter howl, or every bellows burst, be happy. Whatever happen in your life, whatever struggle you may come across, whatever war you may have to encounter, no, you won't be unhappy at all. You will be happy still. So he wants his daughter to be free from hatred, which will make her radiate, which will make her happy, which will make her fearless, which will be giving her all that she wishes for. So hatred is a voice that he condemns a lot. The last stanza. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all is accustomed, ceremonious, for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. How but in custom and in ceremony are innocence and beauty born? Ceremonies the name for the rich horn, custom for the spreading laurel tree. So this is a ultimate wish of any parent. The marriage of the daughter or the son would be the ultimate aim, ultimate dream that the parent dreams of. And you have to remember this dream has been made when the child is only 2 days old. 2-day old daughter is in his mind and he's thinking about a marriage. And he wants her to get a husband from a very traditional household. Accustomed means a house that follows all tradition, as all ceremonies. For arrogance and hatred, arrogance, indifference or stubbornness or hatred are the wares or the products peddled in the thoroughfare. If a house is not following the customs and rituals of the country, then that is a place where this hatred and arrogance will find its place. So if you are getting married to a man from a very traditional culturally rooted house, you will be free from arrogance and hatred. How but in custom and ceremony are innocence and beauty born. So once you are born in a very ceremonious household, a culturally bright household, what happens? Innocence and beauty are your added advantages. You will be born with these two qualities, innocence and beauty. You will be beautiful. The beauty he is talking about is not the appearance, but the beauty of the heart. If you are born in a very good traditional household, then you will be blessed with these two qualities, innocence and your beauty. Ceremony is the name for the rich horn. He's again talking about the horn, something that gives you the boom, and custom for spreading the laurel tree. So laurel tree can find strong roots only in a very traditional setup. In its own culture, it can spread roots like that. If you're born in a traditional family, you can also flourish like that of the laurel tree, blessed with innocence and beauty. So this is the end of the poem where the poet is asking the child to be flourishing, hidden like a laurel tree, but flourishing like a laurel tree. For that, she has to get a husband from a very traditional, ritual following household, a very ancestral household he wants his daughter to find a husband for. So this is a beautiful poem. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you love reading it. Read the poem, only then you can understand the beauty of it. The father's feelings could be understood. Now we come to the poetical qualities of the poem. It is having 10 stanzas. I have already told you stanza with summary. You would have noticed just 10 stanzas. 8 lines followed with a couplet. Couplet is a 2-line format of a poem. So you find 8 lines with a couplet in all the 10 stanzas, and it is filled with imagery. So the wartime and the violence and storm, everything is getting conveyed through the storm that comes from the Atlantic and the frenzied drum beating. All that is symbolic of the violence of man and the violence that we could see in the World War and the Anglo-Irish War. Then there are also imagery of Helen and Aphrodite. Actually, they are metaphors. They talk about how beauty always spoils the good characters and the wisdom of the women. So Helen and Aphrodite, they come for Morgan. Morgan has been presented as beautiful as that of either Helen or Aphrodite. Then Laurel and Lynette, they stand for innocence, tradition, custom, deep-rootedness, all those which he wishes for his daughter. So innocence and beauty, just like the laurel tree and the linnet, is something that he aspires for his daughter to acquire. These are the images. This is the poem about. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you understood. More than enjoyment, I do not know how far being undergraduate students, I don't know how far you have developed your aesthetic sense of enjoying poetry. But this is a brilliant poem that shows what a great father that W.B. Yeats is. And his wishes shows his worry, his anxiety, his fear, and more than that, his prayer for a beautiful world for his daughter to live in. Thank you.